Stone Cold Prose, building better words.
I found myself in Hollywood again. I can't remember the date or the exact circumstances, but it was a beautiful evening. Balmy, with a breeze that ruffled the palm trees that nod over the boulevard. My destination was Burbank and home. But though traffic was mysteriously light, almost non-existent actually, I found myself in no hurry to get there. Between the weather, the open road, the superb tunes that were rolling out of my radio, and my general state of relaxation, I was enjoying myself thoroughly. As I shot past the Hollywood Bowl to the 101 freeway, which connects to the 170, equally and suspiciously free of cars all the way, I was struck by a realization which made me laugh out loud, literally, quite by accident. I had rediscovered the joy of cruising. Hi guys, welcome back to Stone Cold Prose, where we build better words, better thoughts, and better men. I'm Miles Watson, novelist and author of such award-winning series as Cage Life, Sinner's Cross, and The Chronicles of Magnus. I spent 10 years in the criminal justice field, another dozen in Hollywood, and now I break it all down and build it back better. So let's get into this. Let's get into this beer too. Cruising, or in the parlance of my parents, going for a drive, is something which used to be an important part of my life. It's one of the few distinct pleasures which I remember from high school, which otherwise was not all that pleasurable of an experience, prom night possibly aside. The ages between, say, 12 and 16 are, let's face it, a continuous struggle to define oneself as an adult, at a time when one is actually a child both physically and mentally to some degree, and the acquisition of a driver's license bestows upon the teenager a precious commodity, temporary freedom. You may live, as I did, in a too small house with too many people and animals, and spend the rest of your time jammed in a school with a couple of thousand other equally frustrated young humans. You may exist in a state of simmering sexual frustration, the victim of hormonal mood swings and the quasi-tantrums that result from them. You may be oppressed by parents, by homework, by chores, by bullies, by elder siblings, by teachers, and the sense that one's life is not one's own and there is no such thing as privacy. But when they hand you that license and a set of keys, everything changes, if only for an hour or two, once in a while. When I was about 17, I had a specific ritual that I followed, beginning in the spring and ending somewhere in the fall. When the weather was just right, in that period of day which is formally known as the gloaming, when the sun is down but light still fills the sky, it's the magic hour in Hollywood, I would swing into the 77 old Cutlass Supreme that was my temporary chariot, fire up every one of the 350 cubic inches of the engine, set the 4-barrel carb to rumble, and have myself a drive. I grew up near the Potomac River, among trees and ivy and rolling hills. It was suburbia, but not the sort that desecrates the landscape. The houses all seemed like hobbitons sort of growing up out of the earth in the shade of the trees, like natural phenomena. Just a few minutes from my house, there were single-lane railway bridges, fast-moving streams, brooding woods, and sprawling fields unbesmirched by a single man-made structure. In the summers, after a thunderstorm, mist would hang thick over the woods and the open pastures. The air was full of fireflies. In the fall, the sharp October air was full of the spice of decaying leaves and wood smoke, because people still burned leaves. All of this was a perfect backdrop for cruising. I would steer the great Cutlass through the landscape, passing the homes of schoolmates, inhaling the perfume of growing things, and listening to the mixtape I'd jammed into the dashboard tape players. In those days, every kid was armed with a tremendous collection of mixtapes, mostly recorded off the radio, and there was one for every mood. Nowadays, you say there's an app for that, right? In those days, you said there's a mixtape for that, that being your state of mind. If you were angry, if you were lonely, if you were feeling confident, happy, or just plain horny, you had a collection of songs you could fall back on to enhance those feelings. The construction of a mixtape was a science that had to be carefully apprenticed before it could be mastered. I could probably write a book about the techniques necessary to produce the perfect mixtape if I thought anyone would read it. At any rate, I had more tapes than I could count, a whole bucket full. But there was one in particular that always accompanied me when I went cruising. After all these years, I can only recall 2 songs on it, Guns N' Roses' Patience and You Don't Move Me Anymore by Keith Richards. But the effect it produced in me on those lazy, kind of moonlighted evenings in the summer, I can remember perfectly after all these years. It was a sensation of freedom, coupled with the knowledge that in that moment, I was completely unreachable by telephone, parent, or teacher. Nobody knew where I was. Nobody could tell me what to do or how to do it. Cell phones did not exist. GPS tracking did not exist. When you got in that car, you were like a deep sea diver with 1,000 feet of water over his head, immersed in yet disconnected from the world around you. Returning from a good cruise produced in my teenage body and mind the exact feelings which a cigar and 2 fingers of Irish whiskey produce in my middle-aged brain today. Peace and contentment. At the moment of my Hollywood epiphany, I realized that it had been nearly a dozen years since I had simply gone for a drive. When I moved to Los Angeles in 2007, I quickly discovered that the traffic in LA, along with the inadequate road system and the brutality of the summer and the early fall weather, were not conducive to cruising. Indeed, nobody around here drives just for the hell of it, just for the sake of it. Though LA is famous for its car culture, the automobile in LA is either a status symbol or as a means to an end. The idea that it can be used as a balm for one's soul is not even considered by most people. Conditions simply make it impossible. The circumstances which allowed me to cruise by accident were simply a set of perfectly aligned flukes, which I'd never experienced before and rarely experienced afterwards. Nevertheless, having gone for a drive by accident, it got me thinking back then about how much life has changed since my cruising days, since the time I used to spend hours in the basement or in my room patiently waiting for the right song at night to come over the radio so I could add it to my latest mixtape. I realized that I'm now old enough to mourn the way things were when, the way it was when. Being born in the early 70s, I have layers and layers of intricate memories of a now extinct society, a world before cellular phones or mobile devices or the internet, before microchips in cars, before recycling, before CDs and MP3s and podcasts, before Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, before streaming services and cloud drives, before almost everything which makes our modern society work. A world in which going for a drive was a significant act and creating a mixtape was a rite of passage, kind of like a Native American boys learning to track a deer. A world of newspapers, cassette tapes, watches, Walkmans, Atari computers, VCRs, 200-pound television sets with rabbit ears, and mail-order catalogs with 6 to 8 week delivery times. A world of encyclopedias and TV guides. A world in which it was not even possible or desirable to be called or contacted at any time. A world in which the simple act of climbing into a car unplugged you from the world, like Neo in The Matrix. Now, lest you think I'm simply indulging in cheap nostalgia, let me say that I'm quite well aware that the world of the 70s, the 80s, and the early mid-90s, for that matter, was hardly perfect, and we who lived through those times and are old enough to make conscious judgments of them, we know it. We knew it even then. There is no word in the English language for the frustration which a person feels when he desires a technology or a device which does not yet exist. But I felt that frustration quite keenly as a child, as a teenager, and as a young man. Simply put, we knew a much more sophisticated world was around the corner, a world of instantaneous gratification and all hours convenience, but we weren't there yet. We were stuck with cassette tapes and clunky VCRs, and a choice between ABC, NBC, or CBS, or PBS. Stuck with telephone cords that invariably twisted into knots, and the very real possibility of breaking down on a lonely stretch of highway in bad weather with absolutely no frickin' way of calling for help. Stuck with rotary phones that took about 17 minutes to dial. So no, this is not nostalgia, not all nostalgia. Anyway, it's simply an awareness that time is marching on, and that as it so marches, certain pleasures which were unique to my generation have been left behind in its dust, probably forever. Cruising, at least in LA, is one. Assembling mixtapes on clunky tape recorders is another, but the list, if I were to sit down and really think about it, would be immense. In Anne Rice's novel, Interview with a Vampire, the character of Armand explains to the neophyte vampire Louis, that the reason the undead do not really live forever is because very few of them have the stamina for immortality. The vampire Armand explains is born into a particular era, and belongs to that era alone. As time passes, language changes, clothing changes, customs changes, architecture changes, and at some point the vampire finds itself unable to relate to the present. It is still looking for the accents, the styles, the sounds of its own era, now long extinct and never to return. In the end, the loneliness, the imposed isolation, the sense of being in, but not of the world becomes unbearable, and the vampire steps deliberately into the light and destroys itself, like the end of Blackula. I do not, of course, feel that way just now, like destroying myself. I mean, I'm way too young for that. But I have come to understand the grumbling, the carping, the endless complaining my grandparents were guilty of as far back as I can remember. A constant, never ceasing lament about the way the world was when. They talked about things like coal-fired stoves, nickel beers, listening to soap operas on the radio, and the pain-in-the-ass necessity of having your collar turned or your hat reblocked. They talked about how you had to wear a suit or a dress to a movie theater, and how $1 could buy you a steak dinner with all the trimmings and a cold beer on the side and still leave you enough frickin' money for the tip and the trolley home. They talked about how the milkman left the bottle at your door each morning and how much fun it was to scrape the cream off the top and eat it. Now, at that time, I didn't want to hear any of that sort of talk, and it's only recently that I've come to understand what a wonderful insight it gave me into the world in which they experienced their own youth. But it also lends me an understanding of just what it feels like to be the vampire Armand, struggling endlessly to keep up with a life that never stops moving, that allows each of us a certain time to be both in the world and of the world, and then slowly begins to pull away from us, to make us living anachronisms, who bore the younger folk with our tales of the way the world was when. I do not at present have children, but I do have a niece and a nephew, and sometimes when I am regaling them with tales of my own childhood, I can see the boredom glassing over their eyes. They cannot relate, and there is no reason why they should. They belong to a different world, one which is growing more different, more alien, to me anyway, with every passing year. Yet at the same time, I cannot look at them without feeling a twinge of pity. Just as I will never know what it's like to go to school in the horse-drawn sleigh that pulled my grandmother through the Indiana snow 100 years ago, they will never, so long as they live in Los Angeles anyway, know the joy of cruising through somnolent streets on lovely summer evenings alone with their thoughts, knowing they are unreachable, untouchable, totally, wonderfully alone. Nor will they ever grasp the complex mixture of method and patience which was required to construct the perfect mixtape. But I'll tell you this much, friends and neighbors, they don't know what the hell they were missing. Folks, if you enjoyed today's video, please remember to like, subscribe, comment, hit the notification bell, and remember to check out my books. The link is actually in the description. I did it this time. I drop scripted content every Friday at 3 p.m., shorts almost every day, and unscripted rants whenever rage or Irish whiskey moves me to do so. I'll see you next time, and until then, stay cold and keep your mixtape close.